What is going on, peddlers? It feels like it's been a long time, man. These lives need to happen more after. I hope you are well. Thank you so much for joining. Let me just check that the volume's good, that you lot can all hear. It's a bit bright in here, isn't it? Adjust your camera settings, Cam. Just a tad. There we go. The epitome of professionalism. Cameron F1 as per usual. Mary moderator extraordinaire. Baxty B. What's going on, bruv? Akash. Long time no speak, by the way, Baxty. A bit techie that last shakedown, eh? But we've got some things to talk about and address. Akash. Mary again. What's going on, guys? Listen. Live chat will go for no longer than 58 minutes, 60 minutes tops. I promise this time I'm going to be a good chair. I'm going to manage my time and yours. But there's some things that we need to talk about. We've got to talk about Suzuka. We've got to talk about the Japanese Grand Prix, what it means, what it could have in store. We, of course, have to talk about Singapore Grand Prix again, even though it's only a couple of days removed. Will.i.am, what's going on? I wonder where Cam was. It doesn't matter. He's got me. He's got me as Will.i.am. I was like, yeah, no. I thought Will.i.am was genuinely concerned then. And he's got me with the old Rock, who, by the way, is back in WWE for all those WWE fans. Let's talk about some F1. Right, I've got some slides. First, in fact, table setting. Got to talk about George and Lewis because it's techie. It's popped off in the Twitter sphere, hasn't it? And there are some points that are going around, some of which need to get debunked, some of which hold a little bit of water, all of which we are going to talk to. Lewis Hamilton, I keep seeing pictures of him. Oh, he's such a forlorn figure, said Cameron on the shakedown most recently. Bloody Nora, 5 a.m. I hope not. Waiting for watch alongs. Oh, you're talking about times. We will get to that, Baxty, I promise. Need to talk about Lewis. Lots of theories being kicked around, some of which are valid, some of which probably aren't so valid, some of which we talked to on the shakedown. Go and watch the shakedown on this very channel if you haven't watched it already. Another bit of compartmentalized content is coming out at some point this afternoon. 3:30. Oh, forget it. FB1. So since you guys are talking about timing, should we get to that first? Race. British Standard Time this is. 6 a.m. will be the race. Of course, on the Sunday. Back to front, Cameron. Practice 1. 3:30 till 4:30 in the morning, British Standard Time. Practice 2. September the 22nd. So, of course, that is tomorrow. Know your dates, Cameron. 7 a.m, 8 a.m. I'll probably be up for that one. I'm not sure if I'll be live streaming though. Practice 3, 23rd, so that'll be the Saturday, of course. 3:30 till 4:30. But a bit sad that they're not doing a sprint race around there. I think here it'd be a decent track for a sprint race with Suzuka. So epic is it. Qualifying 7 a.m. till 8 a.m. British Standard Time. I think for those guys that are Eastern Time in America, that's 2 a.m. Don't quote me. 2 a.m. to 3 a.m. The race will be at 6 a.m. British Standard Time, 2 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Right, let's have a chat then, chaps, guys and girls. First protocol. I'm really looking forward to this Suzuka Grand Prix, but I don't want to get ahead of myself as far as my expectations. What I would say is that I don't think it's wise to look at the Suzuka Grand Prix or to look at the Singapore Grand Prix even and extrapolate that level of competitiveness and expect to see something similar to the Suzuka Grand Prix. Here's why. A couple of reasons. I feel like that setup was the cause of Red Bull's woes. I've had a chat with a couple of different people in the know, far more in the know than you and I. And everything that I keep hearing back indicates that Red Bull's woes were a source of their setup ills, primarily ride height, with a view to avoid that old skid plank wearing out. Now, there are a couple of different articles around. Baxty showed me one really, really good on motorsport.com that says potentially they could be some of the teams, one of whom could be Red Bull, could be doing something a bit dodgy with the plane underneath the skid block. So last year, remember, TD039 was a technical directive brought in because they said that they were doing something weird with the skid block. Skid block, remember, 2 millimeters of wear only. If it wears down any further than that, then the teams are riding too low too frequently. That's an issue. They would get DQ'd, but nevertheless, because of ground effect, the teams are of course incentivized to run the cars as low as possible to access the most downforce most frequently. That is true. Were they doing something dodgy last year? Well, it appears that Ferrari were doing something dodgy last year, but the pertinent question at hand this year is, are Red Bull doing something dodgy this year? Now, the motorsport.com article insinuates that Red Bull potentially could be doing something with the plane above the skid block to make sure, obviously, that they don't wear it 2 millimeters over the course of a race distance. Now, we saw something dodgy going on with Spa. Red Bull, again, with a view to access the most ground downforce in ground effect area possible, were running a tad too low. But because of the nature of Spa as a track, they were able to ease off through Eau Rouge, and there's not much compression, much area or sections of compression on the remainder of the circuit. Cool. Singapore, though, was a little bit different, right? Because even though they've resurfaced, it's still quite bumpy in parts. When you watch it back on the straight, you can see them kind of like, it's weird when you see the cars kind of deviating on the straight, almost looking for the flat ground. And that's because Singapore is so contoured yet and still, even after the resurfacing exercise. So that didn't give Red Bull the ability to drive around the skid pan issue, which is why they messed up the ride height. Adrian Newey & Co. erred on the side of caution in, let me try and get this right, FP1 and FP3. FP1 and FP3, they were good, weren't they? FP2 and Quali, they had issues because they were tinkering a couple of different reasons. Again, watch the video on the Mothership channel where we talk about it at some length. So rapid does the track's grip evolve. If you set up the car for low grip, then in the second session of the day when the track is super grippy, it's almost like your setup's not applicable, right? It's not perfect. You haven't set the car up in the perfect window anymore because circumstances evolved. Here's another point worthy of mention, and again, from my context in the know, Adrian Newey is a guy who packs his car. He's very efficient with the way that he sets up his car, right? Tries to shove as many things into that design philosophy bag as possible, not least of which is their gear shift, right? The seamless shift, as people in the know call it. The humidity around Singapore caused them a problem. And you heard Max Verstappen speaking to this over the course of the weekend. I'm hearing that the biggest problem that Red Bull had was that seamless gear shift and the effect that the humidity had on it. And now that's not to say that they won't have similar issues at Suzuka, because Suzuka is similarly humid. However, the forecast is rain, right? So that might help Red Bull again. And if we check the odds, peddlers, Max Verstappen right back up there. Now, I feel like they messed up the odds. The bookmakers, Baxty will tell you as much. I had a cheeky, what's going on, Foster, JBH. Salam. I will get to all of your comments. And listen, if you've got a question that you want me to answer, I will get to them in the last 10, 15 minutes. We're going 60 minutes, no more, no less. Something I wanted to get to. Hold on, sorry. I just want to make sure that the stream is still streaming. Oh, drop me a 1 in the chat if we're still live and you can still hear me. Get massively nervous about this, guys. It's been a while, man. 37 concurrent viewers. Thank you to each and every single one of you, man. You guys are proper legends in the game. Just drop me a 1. Let me know if you can still hear me loud and clear, because I'm getting paranoid around here. It's effective. I traded for Baxty can still hear me, bro. Okay. We're talking about previous Grand Prix, Singapore, perfect. Thank you, Sling68. Thank you, Baxty. Thank you, Joe. Right, we're talking about Singapore still. So all that leads me to believe that I don't think we can expect to see parallels between Red Bull's underperformance at Singapore at Suzuka. I'm just being honest. It's going to get techie. Who knows? I won't be mad at it if we do, because again, a lot of us are here for competition and friction and uncertainty and crescendo. And if, of course, stating the obvious, Cameron, if Red Bull underperform again, we'll get another sick Grand Prix, won't we? And it was a sick Grand Prix at Singapore. I enjoyed it. Let me talk to that very quickly, because I enjoyed it massively. I was listening to one of my numerous podcasters, and he was talking about Batman. Apparently there's Batman Day a couple of weeks back, and he watched the trilogy back to back, and he was talking about Dark Knight Rises and said something to the effect of Chris Nolan's abilities to make you just lose yourself in the film. You're not watching a film anymore. You're there with Batman. You lose track of time. It's thrilling. You are invested in life and death, and that for me, ironically, is what Singapore Grand Prix was. It was uncertain. It was brilliant. I've heard people try and talk it down and say, well, listen, there was a massive lull in the middle of it and it wasn't that great a Grand Prix, or even it was only that good because we've been starved for the bulk of the season with rubbish Grand Prix. And listen, you can be a glass half full type or a glass half empty type, right? And on this occasion, I loved the Grand Prix. I'm not going to get outraged at F1 on other people's behalf. I loved it. The last 20 laps of the race, and as well, when you see it kind of building, right, there was friction at the start with Charlie and Carlos, of course, and you kind of didn't know how were Ferrari going to play this. Were they going to let Charles go on the softer compound tyres, or were they going to defer? You're seeing the dynamics play out between the Ferrari protagonists in real time, and they will have far-reaching ramifications, right, for next season and beyond. I'm loving it. I'm loving it. The Mercedes pairing, who we will get to in some depth, I promise you. How was that going to play out? Were they going to do the switcheroo? Were they going to let George? Were they going to clip George's wings the next up? Or were they going to be, mate? There was friction in there. You had friction between Perez and Albon. Ocon's, the unfortunate circumstance around Ocon, brilliant drive, but unreliability hits him. Checo, there were so many plot lines, proper plot lines, not plot lines that I'm going to try and proselytize you for. Oh, you need to be interested in lower than third because there's no. These were proper uncertainty, friction that we didn't know what was going to happen until the very final laps. Friction, uncertainty, and crescendo. F1 for my money at its very best, and I loved it. Here for it, guys. When F1's like that, no better sport. And I watch a lot of sport, right? I watch a lot of sport. No better sport in the world. When F1's like that in quali-trim, mate. Absolutely incredible. Do me a favor, guys, drop the like, man. It helps the stream. Nothing like that in the world. Dudes driving at that. That's when we need to talk about F1 on the back of it. And I don't think this is being said often enough. Me, Baxty and Shez didn't even do it justice on the shakedown this week. That was an incredible Grand Prix. Really, really sick. Like you literally are on the last 20 laps. It felt like 2 minutes. It was bonkers. It was absolutely crazy. I loved it, man. I absolutely loved that Grand Prix. If every single guy, listen, I'd pay a lot of money for every single Grand Prix I can watch between now and the day that I pop my clogs, then that would be lovely. But again, some will argue that you have to have the yin to yang, right? There is no sweet without the sour. Maybe that Grand Prix isn't as sick if we haven't had a very monotonous season hitherto. It's an interesting one, eh? All right, let's talk about, I'm going to bring up the power rankings. All right, so let's talk about these drivers on the back of Singapore. I know I'm a bit, maybe we got 5 seconds for album, Jake Foster. I will get to your comments, guys, I promise. But listen, if you've got a question, go onto the community tab and drop it. I'm going to go to all the questions through there. I want to get to a couple bits and bobs first and foremost. Okay, first port of call, George Russell. George Russell was absolutely increíble, for my Spanish-speaking listeners, incredible over the course of the weekend. Now, I had a thought over the night. I was thinking about this because, again, we were on the shakedown and I felt like I did George a little bit dirty. All I was concerned with selfishly is the agency of my driver, Lewis Hamilton. I wanted to see him win. And since he had a whiff of victory, pull the switcheroony, Mercedes. Surely, Cameron said, optimise for your chances. And in my mind, as I watched that Grand Prix towards the end of the race, the last 15 to 17 laps, it became clear that Lewis Hamilton was the faster Mercedes driver. So in that situation, put my Christian Horner cap on, pull the switcheroo, let Lewis have a crack at it. Maybe he gets it done, maybe he doesn't get it done. But in my humble opinion, Mercedes had the best chance of victory or maximising by doing that. And that made sense as I was talking through. But again, I feel like context is key in all this, and I feel like I was being a bit blinkered. Here's why. Baxty said it very eloquently on the shakedown. George Russell was incredible all race weekend. Lewis, quite frankly, couldn't see which way he went. Out qualified by circa, was it half a second? 0.4? It was a lot. It was material, the difference between them. And similar story for all the free practices. So how could Mercedes then rip out the rug from George Russell, Kings Lynn, Norfolk's finest, on the last couple of laps? That would have been wicked at best. That would have been really, really bad. It would have been really, really bad. You would be literally clipping George Russell is next year. In the next few years, there will come a point when Lewis Hamilton will retire. And after that, who's going to be the Mercedes torchbearer? George Russell. First of his name, Kings Lynn, Norfolk. So what you can't do, again, if you're a leader, if you're a manager, now's not the time to be clipping George Russell's wings. Even, I'm saying this is a Lewis Hamilton fan, a dude that would pay a lot of money to see Lewis on the top step of the podium, particularly at Singapore, where we know he is good, right? But to do that then, timing is key, right? There is a time and place for any action. To rip out the rug from underneath George Russell, which is exactly what you'd be doing by pulling the switcheroo after George had performed immaculately for 99.9% of that Grand Prix. To order them to do the switcheroo, you can't do it. Okay, so Christian Horner probably would have, but that's I think that's why most of us are Mercedes fans around these parts, because we identify with the sports etiquette thing and being a human, being a winner, a world-class leader, but being a human as well, and being engaged in the whys as much as the whys and the hows as much as the whats. I don't hate it. In retrospect, taking some time to reanalyze, and again, you will hear me on the shakedown, I wasn't too happy. Taking some time to reflect on it, I think Mercedes did the right thing by not clipping George's wings and dictating, ordering the switcheroo via team orders, even though Lewis Hamilton at that stage of the Grand Prix with 5 laps to go represented their best chance of getting 25 points. Ultimately, they're not in a title fight, right? So the picture needs to be broader than Cameron's very linear, let's just win this race. And Christian Horner would have thought the same, right? Let's just get this race. It's 25 points. Well, it's bigger than that. We're working on this isn't a 1 year forecast. This is a strategic 5-year plan that Mercedes are working to, with Lewis Hamilton retiring at some point within the next 3 to 5 years, whatever. So they've got to nurture George, continue to nurture George. And I think we saw post race, although don't be tricked by George Russell's brilliance, because he's not a champion yet. He's still a champion in training, and there's something to be said for that. When he's in the car and he says, "Oh, what am I, an effing rookie?" Well, not a rookie in the sense that it's your maiden season, George, but you're learning still, right? He's still going to make those mistakes. He's always been not quite Charles Leclerc prone to making mistakes, but like we saw Hungary and Bottas, like we've seen him have lapses in memory and concentrate. Like, he's learning, and I think we shouldn't be too harsh on him for that. Don't gauge. It's fool's gold to compare Lewis Hamilton at this stage of his career, 7-time champion, a gazillion podiums, a gazillion pole positions, and George Russell. I feel like George Russell's almost like 16 years old. So he's not 16, but in his demeanour sometimes, I feel like he needs... I feel like Toto's done a smart thing there. Nurture this chap. Bring him up. He will be a champion one day. Today, he is not that. Not yet. But brought along at the right speed, with the right experiences, alongside Lewis Hamilton's 7-time champion GOAT settings, George Russell will one day get it done for you. What you don't need to do, though, if you are team principal of a George Russell or a Charles Leclerc or a Lando Norris, is pull the rug out from underneath these guys. You can't chop off their balls, and that's exactly what they would have been doing had they ordered the switcheroo in the final stages of that Grand Prix after such an epic weekend of George Russell's performance. Give that dude a hug, man. Give that dude a hug. I don't begrudge him crying either. I don't begrudge him crying. I would have cried too. Big 40-year-old man Cameron. I would have cried too after I'd done anything, everything in my powers to nail that podium, to fall foul of a mistake like that. And the joke is, let's be honest, if Lando doesn't touch the barrier, I've raced a lot of laps around Silverstone, and I've raced a lot of laps on the sim at home. Not a proper one. Nevertheless, similar thing. You know what I mean? If you're trailing somebody and they make a mistake, do you know how hard it is not to follow them into that mistake? I have done it a million times, promise you. Okay, so George touched the wall harder than Lando. Maybe he was pushing harder than Lando. It's an easy mistake to make, is the point that I wanted to make. And there you go. That's all I say on George Russell. Oh, actually, finally, another cheeky thought as I thought about this and allowed it to marinate over the last 24 hours. Why was George slower all of a sudden? Now, there's 1,000,001 potential answers to that question. Maybe he was tired. Maybe he's not as physically fit as a Lewis Hamilton. Maybe he had an issue with the car. Here's my theory that I'm going to posit to you guys that are watching. Here's the thing, and I'll get, you know what, since we're talking George, I will get to George again in a second. Here's what I think happened. I went back and watched the timing. So they pitted like with 17, 16 laps left. Yes, they came out the pits and Lewis Hamilton was like 5.2 seconds behind George. Cool. The lap, on their outlap, each of their outlap, Lewis gapped George to the tune of 0.6 of a second. Now, here's what we know. Medium tyres on a humid track in 2023, ground effect era. What you can't do, and again, you will hear this in many conversations that GP has with Max Verstappen, you've got to nurture the tyres right. You know, when Max goes, there was a couple of races back when Max was like, I knew that I should have just gone for it. In fact, I think it was last season, actually, when he lost position to Charles Leclerc, didn't he? Max was like, I knew that I should have pushed on my outlap. And GP was like, no, you push. These are different tyres. Different tyres, right? You need to nurture them and bring them along to their operating window. And here's what I'm gonna posit. I don't think George did that, you know. I think George left the pit and was in Michael Schumacher mode with Lewis Hamilton now behind him. A case who's got to prove a point still in his mind, and I think George will be a better driver once he unshackles himself from that way of thinking. I don't think he needs to prove himself against Lewis Hamilton. Okay, so he beat Lewis Hamilton last year and there were erroneous and mitigating circumstances around that. But you're not going to beat a Lewis Hamilton every year. Not many champions, by the way, have managed to do that ever. That's the truth. So I think he wants to do the old Nico Rosberg thing and hone in on each session of each and every single race and try and maximise for that in real time. Be present, George. That's why he didn't do. And I think, I'm theorising, that the reason why he was so slow... Because think about it, right? How could George be faster than Lewis every single session? Basically, every single second of every single session all weekend. And then all of a sudden... He's losing time. Gapped him on the outlap. Gapped Lewis, 7-time champion, on the outlap to the tune of 0.4, 0.5, and then was losing time thereafter. You know, I think George Russell pushed it too hard in the outlap. I will be honest. That's what I think happened. And then I think as well, compound that with this. I think George. I'm not sure that this is a critique of George, and I don't think he's worthy of criticism for the weekend performance that he just put in. I think George has, it's not red mist, but I think when podium / top step of the podium is within reach, I think George he reaches for it, doesn't he? Like he You've got to let it come to you. There's a brilliant instance of this sprinting. I used to sprint when I was younger, and Zarnell Hughes was running the 4x100 meters at, I want to say, the Olympics. It was a big event, either the Olympics or the World Championship, and he was winning. And people didn't expect Great Britain to win because they didn't have the fastest runners over 4x1. And he was in the last like 30 meters, and you can see him kind of tense up. And as he's tensing up, you can't tense up in sprinting. I don't think F1 is any different. Tense up and you lose speed, right? You want to be in your flow state, nice and relaxed. And do you know what I mean? Just allow the focus to come and almost allow the car to drive itself like Neo in the bloody Matrix. Zarnell Hughes tensed up and ultimately lost the gold medal to the Italians. The chap next to him who was relaxed. And I think, sadly, for George Russell, I think that was him and Lando and Carlos and Lewis. I think Lewis and Lando and Carlos were relaxed, allowed themselves to see everything in clear blue. I think George saw what was within his grasp and tensed up. That's just my opinion. There we go. There we've done the George Russell deep dive. Go on then. Should we talk about Lewis very quickly as we get the power rankings up? So, Lewis is a techie one, man. Lewis is a very techie one. Well, it's the inverse and opposite to all of what I just said, right? Lewis drove incredibly for a race. But EP 1, 2, 3 quali, he for whatever reason set up it being quali. Maybe he'd set his car up more for the race than quali. I don't know. But he qualifying's important. We can argue the merits back and forth about qualifying all day. Now, I don't think it's as important today as it was, let's say, 5 years ago. It's not, with DRS and DRS train and the malleability of the tyres, etc., etc. But quality is still important, especially when you're in a team where you have a hungry lineup on the opposite side of the garage in George Russell. It's important, right? Signalling matters, even if you are the 7-time champion, because when it gets to the last 3 laps of the race and you're expecting the switcheroo, your case is made more difficult to argue if, for the rest of the weekend, you've been playing second fiddle to George. Now, Lewis Hamilton fans all around the world will argue yet and still that they should have done the switcheroo. I thought so too. Taking a step back, full horizon, I don't think they should have. Now, let's talk about the podium. There is a famous picture that's going around that makes it look like Lewis is a loner. I get why people saw this and went, what a Mercedes, dude. Plus, he's on the podium yet again after Adelaide, where, by the way, George Russell also DNF'd and there was nobody there. Plus, Lewis's demeanour in the cool-down room, he didn't really talk to Lando and Carlos. He looked like he didn't necessarily want to be there on the podium also. But I think this is one of our, humans there's a human fallacy where we connect dots that shouldn't be connected. And I think this is one of those instances based on our confirmation bias and our love affair with Sir Lewis Hamilton here. Listen, there's a video on YouTube. If you just type in, why was Lewis Hamilton alone on the podium? There's a brilliant video. Thank you, Baxty, for sharing that with me, where the dude talks about the logistics. Listen, that paddock only, I think logistically, it only has size sufficient for so many people. So if you look at it, if you pan from that angle, it's all Ferrari, right? It's not like your traditional paddock where there's like loads of different team garages or like pit crew. It's not that. It just wasn't. I think it's fool's gold again. We're barking at the wrong tree to see these photos and say that Mercedes aren't backing Lewis Hamilton. I don't think that's the truth. Why, again, to Baxty's point, said it very eloquently, much more than I, on the shakedown. Why would you give an early 40-year-old a 2-year contract, the same extension as they gave George Russell, first of his name of Kingsley Norfolk, if you didn't support him, if you didn't have faith in him? Those two things don't square. And the bigger of those two that needs to take priority of, course, the contract. I don't think I'd give a 40-year-old or 39-year-old a 2-year extension, I'll be honest. 1 year max, and then you roll it over, right? So that they gave him a 2-year, what more signal of faith and support and belief do we need? So what I don't want to do as a Lewis Hamilton fan is allow my fandom and confirmation bias to obscure what's really happening there between Mercedes and Sir Lewis. Yeah, I would have loved for them to pull the switcheroo, but we've gone through that already. There is an explanation to that, and a sound one too. Plus, they gave him a 2-year and not a 1 year. How can you hate that? Can't hate it. That's what it is. It is what it is. Right, with 30 minutes remaining, you guys, thank you for dropping comments. I will try and get to James Allison said that as many of the staff could go to the podium. There you go, Akash. You've nailed it, bruv. Zabel point, Will.i.am, haven't you been watching the season? Oh, Will.i.am's kicking up dust. Those are just the facts. I didn't say that. The FI teams have all said it. Closer racing gun effects. I will get you lot are kicking off in the comments, and I will get to some of them. But lastly, on George, I know that I contributed to this conversation that's been going on by posting something that Peter Windsor said. Peter Windsor, if you haven't seen that video already on the Mothership channel, Cameron F1, go and check it out. Peter Windsor said something to the effect of, if you have a Lewis Hamilton in the team, that you don't need a George Russell. Because if your priority is to win the Drivers' Championship, then you all need to be, all your dots and crosses need to be pointing in one direction, right? What you don't need is a driver that's capable of taking points off of your top guy. So it's almost like a critical path analysis, right? What do you want? We want to win the World Drivers' Championship. And then secondarily, we want to win the World Constructors' Championship. Who is the guy to do that between Lewis Hamilton and George Russell? So Peter's asserting that Lewis Hamilton is the guy to do that in the very near future. So then you don't want anything distracting him. You don't want any external factors that you have control over to interfere with Lewis Hamilton's CPU on the journey to getting the 8th. And I understand that. But Toto Wolff doing the balanced argument thing, being a bit of a devil's advocate, because I agree with Peter. I do agree with Peter, and that tweet on at Cameron F1 on Whitey has done the rounds, 450. It's gone super viral. I was a bit crafty and I was being a bit of an antagonist by tweeting it when I tweeted it, because I knew that people would have that reaction. Lewis Hamilton fans around the world are seeing what's going on in real time and lashing out at George. And I understand it. Said to Baxty and Shez over the weekend, or on Monday even, excuse me, I understand it, I get it. Because I too want Lewis Hamilton to win. But again, like I just said, to reiterate, I'm not going to let that obfuscate all logic. I'm just not going to. George Russell is an F1 driver and he wants to win. Here's the thing. Friend of the channel, Clinton, put up a survey, and it's an interesting thought experiment. Would George Russell do what Checo Perez did for Max Verstappen in 2021 Abu Dhabi? I think George Russell would. George Russell is there to win 25 points each and every single race weekend. What else do we expect from the chap? Is he not an F1 driver? Isn't the criticism that we level at chaps like Checo Perez and Danny Rick in his trough periods that they weren't doing that? I understand that these two things are not mutually exclusive, but surely he's to be lauded for that. 25 points is what we want our F1 drivers to be invested in. Now, that means, remember, F1 driver, 25 points. You don't get into F1 by being selfless. This isn't United Colours of Benetton and UNICEF, and this isn't an exercise in altruism. It's not. If it is, then you're not going to see your name on a podium, let alone in F1 ever. This is an exercise. To get to F1 demands a certain level of ego and selfishness. But for that, you're not getting to F1 in the first place. Do you know, listen, let me tell you this. 70 concurrent watching. Thank you so much. And I will get some of your comments, Ray, and what's going on. Sylvia, let's go. I hope you're good. Feeder formula. Do you not have a guess? You let me know in the comments how much you think a feeder formula costs. One season's worth of feeder formula in terms of how much money you're going to have to raise. I'll tell you, it's a lot. It's a lot. Anywhere in excess of $300,000. Not Formula One yet, you know. Not F2. We're talking like F3. Do you know I can't afford that. Me and my wife had good. I was thinking about it for my little man. Do I want him to be an F1 driver? Not even the right question that I'm asking, Cameron. Can I even afford for him to be an F1 driver? No, no chance. And me and my wife earn decent money. Our house is a decent, like, do you know what I mean? We do all right for ourselves. Mate, no chance. We can't afford. And my little man's turning 3 in December. He will never become an F1 driver, sadly, because we just don't have the finances to support that. That's the honest truth. That's the honest truth. So shout out to the guys that are coming up, like Joshua Bugembe. Shout out to him and his family, because they're doing everything. He's a talent, yeah, and they're doing everything they can to help him realize his dreams. We need to, as a community, we need to rally around. I need to dial him, actually. Okay, get back to the point. I can't hate George for being an F1 driver, for trying to maximize his race weekend and get 25 points, even if the equal and opposite of that means that my driver doesn't maximize his race weekend. That's what they're all to do. I almost wish, here's my hot take, peddlers. Here's my wish. I almost wish Lewis, especially hearing him in the aftermath of the Singapore Grand Prix, the way he was talking about George, etc., etc. I almost wish that Lewis would take some of the ruthlessness from George and use that to apply to his track. That's my honest critique of Lewis. He needs some of what now. Okay, so he's the elder statesman, and I get that they have that mentor-mentee relationship, and that obviously informs Lewis checking on George after the race and saying that he wishes George would have won because he deserved it and drove impeccably all weekend. Selfishly, though, have some of that ruthlessness, Lewis. It will help you in seasons to come, sir. Right, let me get these rankings back up quickly as I'm running out of time. Carlos Sainz 10. Carlos Sainz was absolutely incredible, wasn't he? Who knew, peddlers? Who knew? Not me, because I bet a couple quid on Charles Leclerc. I still think Charles Leclerc could have won that race, but he would have had to win it in a different way. Being honest, I don't think Charles Leclerc, the Monegasque, wins that race from the way it panned out, right? He would have had to gap the rest of the. I don't think he's got the nous to do the DRS, to facilitate the DRS train with Lando and get the deltas between him and. I just don't think that I don't think Charles has the race savvy or the racing IQ even to win the race in the same way that Carlos Sainz did. And Sainz is worthy of praise for that. That was incredible. That was incredible. Again, I said it in the shakedown in real time. I race, man. Like, I've been in karts and race Van Silverstone a gazillion times. We have the ability to read a race. When Carlos Sainz says, give me the deltas back to Lando Norris every single lap, how can we not? I think he's missed something. Like, no, mate, you need the deltas to the Mercedes pairing, not Lando. The danger is going to come from Lewis and George, not Lando. He's a couple steps ahead of me, isn't he, Carlos? And then to drive it, to execute it, to get the splits, whatever. But do you know how hard it is to drive like, oh, mate. Fair play, Carlos. I, for one, I've got to give credit, man. I got to shut my mouth for a little bit because I didn't think Carlos Sainz had that in his locker. Really didn't. Lando nailed it, didn't he, as well? I think Lando's probably the dark horse in this equation because he drove incredibly and everybody's talking about Carlos Sainz and Mercedes. Fair play, Lando. There was a cheeky video that I was going to get up of, check it out on Instagram. George is about to give his interview in the pen, and Lando's just finished giving his. So they have an interaction. Their eyes meet, and Lando looks at George, and I'm expecting Lando to give I'm expecting empathy and sympathy from Lando. Are you joking? Lando's looking at George and he's laughing. Like, he can't even hide, and it's an awkward situation because you can't even hide it. Lando is a joker, he's a troll. But I can't hate that he was happy for the way for his second step at the podium, man. He deserved it. Liam Lawson. Mate, he's driving incredibly, isn't he? And this is from somebody who doesn't really tend to look to the back. To come into F1 and start nailing it straight away is that's alchemy. People just don't do it. It's really, really hard to come into F1 ever and nail it. Let me fix this for you guys. It's really hard to come into F1 at any time and nail it right. Some people, for some people, for most people, for 95% of all of F1 drivers that ever come into F1 to achieve high levels of performance is a unicorn, right? Never get it done. Liam Lawson's coming in, he's nailing it. To not give that dude a drive for 2024, sacrilege. Lewis Hamilton, talked about him already. Oscar Piastri just nailing it again. Gasly, K-Mag, Esteban Ocon, bless him. Again, super unlucky. I think they've got Esteban Ocon a bit low in that. How can Esteban Ocon be 7.6 and George 7? I don't know. That's a bit controversial. Alex Albon again got himself crashed out. Charles Leclerc, bloody Nora, 7. That's techie. Anyway, whatever. I digress. Right, I think it's comments time. Let me just show you some. I prepared some other slides for us to go through. Lewis, that is a sad image, isn't it? Whoever took that picture, agency and agenda, knew what was going on. Timings for Suzuka. Looking forward now. So we said that already. I'm not going to go through it again. You guys can check out that early start for those of us in the UK. It's going to be techie to try and catch that live, but I think it's worth it, man. There is we are all invested now. There is a reason to tune in. It's not just necessarily going to be Max from start to finish. It could be, but you don't know, right? So filled with jeopardy was Singapore. You don't know. You just don't know. Maybe it was a ride height anomaly. Maybe it was something more insidious. Maybe it was TD039. That was the old one, wasn't it? TD018 more recently. Maybe it is that. Who knows? Right. Suzuka, epic track. Wet. That's what I want you to take from this. It is going to be wet potentially, particularly for the qualifying sessions, free practice. It's always wet around Suzuka. You remember a couple of years back, or last year even, when Max Verstappen with a full fuel tank nailed it round the outside turn one of Charles Leclerc. One of the drives that made me think Max Verstappen is just a different gravy. It's went round in the wet, okay, so round the outside, off of the racing line, the racing wet line is always going to be quicker, and Charles Leclerc, for whatever reason, chose to take the traditional racing line in the wet, which left the outside into turn one, free for Max Verstappen to nail him, but nevertheless, to do that with a full fuel tank from second on the grid was epic from Max Verstappen. All right, so there's some very sexy social media releases from Williams and Aston Martin. They always do this in homage to Suzuka and Japan. Those two are sick. Those two, the Aston Martin one in particular, is incredible. I love that stuff. One of the great things to come out of the pre-race stuff for the Suzuka Grand Prix. Actually, there is one thing I wanted to read out. It's 53 laps, a long lap. 1:30 is the record lap time. Circuit length 5.3. Right, let's get through some questions because I've been going long and I've been talking a long time. I hope you guys are enjoying this, man. I feel a little bit rusty as far as the live format. It's been a while though. You got to give me. I'm a bit making mistakes left, right, and centre like George Russell around here. So I just talked about how harsh people are to him, and then I go and say that. Hey, go on then. Let me get. And anytime I do this, I'm going to try and do this at least once a week. I want to get to 3 times a week so we can foster rapport more and talk. But when Max Verstappen's winning, it's kind of hard for me to jump on here and find something to talk about. I'll be honest with you. Right. But anytime I do these, be sure to get yourself in the night before I do them. I will drop a community tab post. On the community tab post, you got a question, drop it on there and we'll get to it, which we will do now before I get to it. Thank you so much to each and every single one of you. Have you seen Lewis's new lid? Does it look sick, Sylvia? I haven't seen it. I saw, I want to say I saw Ocon's. I was going to have it up here as a slide, but I didn't know whose it was. I think it is Ocon. They all come with these sexy new white lids. That I wouldn't mind. I wouldn't mind if Red Bull came with that old sexy livery, the white one. Mate, that was God tier. Right, after I've been chattering on. So yeah, Red Bull, we've gone through it already, but just for the avoidance of doubt, I'm not sure that Red Bull, I think they'll be right back at the front as per usual this weekend, because I do think everything I'm hearing, and if you look at the evidence in total, I do think it was as much. I'd love for it to be TD018. All of that stuff, I would love for their underperformance to be a result of that. The case being, again, Baxty's motorsport.com article. The case being that Red Bull for the longest time have been doing something tricky with the plane above the skid block. So you remember, take a step back. These teams need to run these cars as low as possible to access the most amount of downforce in the ground effect era. To do that, some of them last year at the very least were doing something a bit funny, because they can't, if they run too low and wear the skid block in excess of 2 millimeters, then they will just get disqualified. It's dangerous. They'll get those are the rules. So how do you access all of that ground force, that downforce in a ground effect era without wearing away that block, right? Well, how about if you had something above that contracted somehow? I don't know the mechanics of it, but supposing it, for the sake of argument, supposing it contracted or came up into the car, then you'd be able to run it further down, right, without wearing the skid block away. There goes that's the theory, potentially, that Red Bull are doing. I don't think it's that, though. And the reason why I don't think it's that, I think it's a setup issue, only because of the variability in the performance of the RB19 over the course of the Singapore Grand Prix weekend, right? FP1, decent. FP2, shocking. FP3, decent. Tinkered again before qualifying. Qualifying, shocking. Race, decent. Surely then, if it was TD018, you'd expect them to be rubbish the whole race weekend. That's my theory. Therein lies my theory, but who knows? I'm just a noddy F1 fan now. All right. So let's get to questions. Red Bull have done on now, says nice. No, we've addressed that already. I am new, says Jean. Let's have a question. Why did it seem that Lewis is hated? I haven't seen anything about the guy other than class or perseverance. He was a little cocky and in dating fine. Okay, so let me address this now. There are so many strands that you can pull at this, so many threads. Listen, I love Lewis Hamilton primarily as a racing driver. I'm not overly enamoured with all of the off the track shenanigans. Like when I see all the pictures of him rocking, I'm not a fashion guy, right? So I don't love fashion. I'm a simpleton. You see me rock up here with this old hoodie nearly every video. Like I'm old. I'm a simpleton. Like I'm a guy who likes simple things. So when I see Lewis, okay, here's the question. Would I like Lewis more if he was kind of like, if I saw more of me in him? Of course I would. But this is individuality, right? Like Lewis likes fashion. I don't like fashion. And on that, we will disagree. But like, Lewis is a bloody incredible driver. And for me, that's what matters most. 2007, when this dude was coming up, I've never been more invested in the rise of a sports star than maybe say a John Jones or a Tiger Woods. Like it was incredible. Like I grew up with a chap, me and him a similar age. I'm always going to be. I will be critical of Lewis, but that's different. The hate that Jean talks about, or Jean. There are many reasons why people dislike / hate Lewis Hamilton. Maybe you're a Max Verstappen fan and you just don't like. He's the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? Like I don't like, or the inverse. I don't like you because you're Max Verstappen's principal rival. There is some of that. There is some, like, listen, there's races in the world, so of course people are not going to like Lewis Hamilton because they're racist. Like there are a gazillion different reasons why people don't like Lewis Hamilton. And for the same reason, there are a gazillion different reasons why people love Lewis Hamilton. It's techie. It is techie, that, and that could go. We could go another 60 minutes on that one alone. Promise you. A lot of things in F1 make me uncomfortable because we're already dealt with this stuff in other sports. So I think what Gene's alluding to is the R word, and I don't know what more to say to that than all sports are just a magnifying glass of the world entire, right? And since there is sadly still racism, probably always will be racism in the world, ergo there is racism in sport. And there has, I think F1 has done a lot of good work and is doing a lot of good work going forward. Is there still room to improve? Absolutely. But listen, it is what it is. And at this point, like I said it on the shakedown a couple of weeks ago when it was Helmut Marko's time. Like, I don't even want to talk about like that race last week. We've got two options: talk about that race last week, or talk about come on here and start spouting Max Verstappen hatred. I'm going to talk about that race last week. Talk about racism in the world and all this stuff, or Singapore and the epic crescendo that I want to talk about Singapore each and every single time. I don't want to talk about that. To deal with that every single day, it's like, nah, no tar. And to say that is to say that sports is, it's an oft trotted out cliche. It really is. Say this a lot, and you'll hear me say time and time again on the shakedown. Sports is escapism. People will say, and it's a lazy journalistic trope, but I believe in it. You know, life can be tough, yeah. And my life is easy relatively. I know there are people all over the world who have lives exponentially harder than you, Cameron, and your privileged lifestyle that you lead with your big fancy bloody accountancy job and your missus who's also doing very well. Like that. There are people who have hard lives in the world, and on Sunday, when it's Lewis versus Max versus Carlos and Charles and George, that provides them with an avenue for 2 hours where life is just a little less hard. And I don't hate that. I don't want for those waters to be muddied by anything, let alone racism. Like, I just don't want to do. I'd rather. I know we need to talk about it, and there's an obligation to, and it will never improve if we don't. Of course, but I don't know. People watch F1 for different things, right? Listen, there are YouTube channels out here, and they're still talking about flipping Abu Dhabi 21. Haven't yet released a video that's not about Abu Dhabi 21, and that's their prerogative. I'm not here to criticize nor condemn anyone else for the lens through which they view F1. That's their thing. Like, I don't want to talk about that. There was other things after Singapore. Are you joking? There were other things that I want to talk about as a channel. Sans racism and controversy, but listen, some people, that ticks some people's boats there. Not everything's for everyone. That's the Aesop's fable, eh? Right, other questions. Let's go. Thank you for those who dropped questions, by the way. Why didn't Lewis overtake George? So I think we covered that. Why didn't Lewis overtake George? I think he could have had a crack. Shez mentioned this on the shakedown. Why didn't Mercedes? I think better question is, why didn't Mercedes order Lewis to pull back? So George could have had a cheeky nibble at Lando, unencumbered by the risk of being overtaken by Lewis. And I think that's a better question, if I'm honest. I don't think Lewis was ever gonna. Lewis put Lewis said over pit radio, didn't he? He was like, George needs to get a move on, but I don't think Lewis is skullduggerous enough to ever. He was never going to have a go at George. That's his mentee. He was never going to have a go unless George made a mistake. Looking at the progress of Mercedes, who do you think is best poised to challenge Red Bull next year, if anyone? So I've talked about this a gazillion times and said it absolutely will not be Mercedes, but they are making progress, right? I think they're favourites. I think it's hard to back against Mercedes being the team most likely to challenge Red Bull now, although Ferrari's package is still bloody good. I'd argue that Ferrari's package as at the 21st of the 9th, 2023 is probably, if I couldn't be in the Mercedes as an F1 driver, I'd probably want to be in the Ferrari, which is ironic because I've been arguing for Lewis to go to Ferrari all this time. And the second that he signs his extension contract, it's That's the time when Ferrari choose to show their hand and start winning races. Will Ferrari catch Mercedes for PT? Baxty legend, same question. I don't think they've caught. Baxter, here's the thing. I don't think we should let the end of that Grand Prix. Okay, there is a tendency to have this recency bias slash availability heuristic, right? These are all like cognitive dissonance. Like, I don't want to look at the last 10 laps and use that to gauge who's got the better machinery over the course of a weekend, because you can't, right? It's apples and oranges. In my opinion, from what I saw, if qualifying is still a thing, I think Ferrari are the second quickest machine. I think they are. Just bet it's close. Mercedes, and that's not to say that Mercedes won't outdevelop them, but techie, let's go, Mary. Is McLaren for real, or a Ferrari and Mercedes just having a really bad year? Says B.C. Elmans. You know, this is another one that I've got to do an about turn on, really, because I thought I went on Tomo's last lap earlier in the year, and I destroyed Peter. Peter, by the way, shout out Peter Mahad on McLaren TV. I was just like, McLaren, who are they? I'm like, this isn't like Ron Dennis's Dayglow McLaren. They're a far cry from that, but they're improving, aren't they? Holy smoke, they're coming along massively, and I think there's something about Zach Brown. He's a bit cringy, isn't he, with the bloody high fives as soon as they get a podium and all this stuff. He's a bit cringy, but he's a businessman and he gets it. Him and Lawrence are cut from a different cloth. They're the types that you kind of want. Like if you need to institute change to get something done, to bring a McLaren, to bring the glory years back to McLaren, as an example. It's a chap like a Zach Brown or a Lawrence Stroll that you want. A chap who can make people sign blank checks, right? It's that type of influencer that you need. So listen, I'm not going to say that McLaren are going to be the ones to usurp Red Bull. That might be a bit far, but McLaren are coming. Shout out Prime. McLaren aren't coming. They're here. In the words of Coach Prime. Mary, thank you so much, moderator. Mary, you are a legend. Smash the like. Let me get through some of your comments. Just in my opinion, loving this live. Thank you so much, Will I Am. You are a legend, brother. And all of you guys that comment and turn up to these and watch the bloody videos that I put out, man, it means appreciation ad infinitum. Genuinely, I say that every time and it sounds cliche. I just repeat it out like it's something, it's a rote learned phrase. No, from the bottom of my heart, man, it means a lot. Williams is the dark horse, says William. William, you know what? I would put McLaren above Williams, and this is just a hunch from talking to people in and around the grid. And Williams have made a step this year, but I suppose the question for Williams, can they continue? So on a learning curve, they're at the very early phase of the learning curve where you gain the most ground most quickly. What happens in year 2? What happens in year 3? I think there are some very easy gains as an instance. Their communication system. That's a quick win, right? And I don't think that'll be massively expensive either. Plug that in and you'll get some gains. But what happens in year 2 and year 3 for Williams? I think McLaren, because they've overcome those quick wins already and they're still improving. For me, Will, that's more impressive. Don't cry. I know, Macon. I need to take a cheeky drink, man. I'm not used, Macon. I'm not used, man. The lives are again, if you don't use it as a skill, you will lose it. Akash loses a role model in the way that he takes that seriously. He acts in the best way, especially during hard. Akash, you're right, bro. That's so true. But do you not find yourself at a time, particularly like Singapore, don't you just want Lewis to turn into bait? It's admirable that at the peak times where it's easiest to turn into a Joker or a Bane, he doesn't. It's admirable. But over the course of a season, let's roll this forward. Let's say Mercedes bring a package next year that's worthy of challenging Red Bull. Lewis can't afford, if he's going to beat Mr. Max Verstappen, Sir Lewis Hamilton can't afford to be. He can't be Bruce Wayne. He's got to get into him. It's not going to work out well. Foster, Zach Brown needs to take a seat in the back. He gives off micromanagement vibes. Foster, Foster, I concur. I think maybe he just made the same point with the cringiness. Mercedes, Ferrari, McLaren are the most likely for me. Baxty, I completely agree with you, bro. Probably not in that order though. I'd switch it round. I think Ferrari. The joke is again another dead wrong from Cameron. I thought Ferrari were going to be. I thought Ferrari at the start of this year were going to come with it because, again, the genesis story of their decline was TD039, right? And I thought at least half of it, because remember, before TD039, they were taking victories off of Red Bull early last year. They were. Charles Leclerc took a couple, right? And then something happened. TD039, potentially. So I expected in the latter half of last season that would give them enough time to wrap their heads around the technical directive and come again. Because still, I think they have the second quickest package, particularly in qualifying, Jim. They just need to sort out the tyre deck, right? That car for now is a tyre eater. That's the issue. Hate comparisons, but think back to 21 Jeddah. Max Waltz off the podium. Yeah, that's so Will there. I think he's talking to the different Max and Lewis are fundamentally different. They start as people and as drivers, but you should never look at me with the Dark Knight analogies. Here's another one. Christian Bale's talking to Michael Caine about the Joker, and Michael Caine says to him, "You know what? The Joker, I tell you who the Joker was. He just doesn't care, right? Remember, he tells the story about the diamonds. He tells the story about the villain in Colombia or wherever that was stealing diamonds, and he wasn't stealing the diamonds to have riches. He didn't want to keep them and sell them. He was just a chaos merchant. Now, that's not to compare Max Verstappen with the Joker, but you see where I'm going with the analogy to fight with somebody over the course of a 23-24 race season who has a lower not a lower threshold of care, but is to prepare to go to places where you're not prepared to go to, is to fight a fight with one hand behind your back, right? Listen, Jeddah. We'll talk about Jeddah, Will, very quickly before I get to some of your comments. I'll go another fight. I'll go to 10 past, guys. Another 7 minutes. Jeddah is crazy, right? Jeddah and Brazil, I think they're pretty much back to back. But Jeddah are examples of the lengths to which Max Verstappen was prepared to go. Now, in my humble opinion, people have different opinions depending on whether you're a Lewis or a Max Verstappen fan, right? And this is why we love the sport sometimes and hate it in equal measure. Brazil and Jeddah were, for me, examples of like the worst side of F1, right? Like, I think the beauty of F1, and Shez will talk to this, of the shakedown, the beauty of F1 is the ability to race clean, right? To be able to Max Verstappen, for example, and Lewis, but Max in particular, when he's at his best, he's clean. I think Max is so good that he shouldn't need to do the brake test in Jeddah or the aggressive overcrowd turn for Brazil 21. Max doesn't need to do that. So when I see him do it, I'm like, oh, God. Like, it's like... But then, by the same token, if Lewis is racing that fella and he's prepared... Say they have equal machinery next year and Max is still that guy that's prepared to do that, and Lewis still has that risk-averse nature about him, like I would, or like you would when we're driving on the road. If there's an accident or, I don't know, like a child jumps in the way or whatever, your instant reaction, your instinct is to jump on the brakes, right? And I think Lewis still has that in him where Max, I think he has Senna in him. The same Senna that in 90 planted his foot deep in the throttle to make sure that he took out Alain Prost, right? Like Max has that. And whilst for me, with my sporting etiquette cap on, I don't like it, but it like wielded as a weapon in the right way against the right person is absolutely a strength. It is. It just is. I don't know. That's the way that I see it. But anyway, we'll see next season, eh? Cryptic, it's not all racism. I'm black and I've never been a Lewis Hamilton fan. Some black people don't like Lewis Hamilton. Cryptic, it's true. I tell you what, Cryptic, let me tell you this. I've got friends that hate Lewis Hamilton. There was once upon a time I wasn't a big Lewis Hamilton fan. And to be fair to you, I don't know if off the track, I'm not sure Lewis Hamilton is the chap that I would go for a beer with. Like, he's a good lad. Like, he's a good person, a brilliant human being. But I don't know if everyone's not for everyone, right? But as a driver, the overarching thing as a driver here, can't criticise him, man. I think Singapore 2018, there were countless silvers, there were countless examples. '07, bloody Australia, turn one, there's loads of examples of this guy being absolutely god tier. When all is said and done, put Lewis Hamilton's face on the Mount Rushmore of F1, has to be. Man puts his money where his mouth is. Where's the hate beyond it? Yeah, well, I suppose I'm expanding upon it now. Macon, Foster, unfortunately, I agree. What's Foster? Is racism simple? Oh, we're getting back onto Lewis. Some of it is racism. You're right, Foster. Some of it is racism. But some people just don't like Lewis Hamilton. It's just so, all right, look, let's divvy it up. I think you guys are dragging me back. Oh, God. Look, so, okay, let me summarise it. Some of it is race. So, racists will not like Lewis Hamilton. Stands to reason, right? And some of it is racism. Some of it is closeted racism as well. And some of it is people that just don't like Lewis Hamilton. So you've got divvy it up into 3/3 and argue the toss amongst yourselves on the percentages between the two. Explicit racists, closeted racists, and people that aren't racist that just don't like Lewis Hamilton. Say that I don't like the fashion, I don't like his personality, whatever. Some people just don't like Lewis Hamilton. Argue the toss. Gregorio, George is not ruthless. Please stop saying that. He's just selfish. He's soft, dude. Cries for nothing. 21 happened to Lewis. He didn't cry about it. What do you mean, Gregorio? That is evidently not true. George was the only driver to tweet about it and say in capitals, this was unacceptable. But Gregorio, let's not do the revisionist history thing. I think, Gregorio, if you check, listen, I don't know anything quite. I'm just a noddy F1 fan here, positing my theory, evidence-based as I possibly can. But everything that I've seen from George Russell, and this is not just in F1, this is coming up through the Formula F2, F3. I think he's ruthless. You only need to go and check the overtake on Jack Aitken to see he's ruthless. He absolutely is. You only need to listen to him talk and listen to his body language. He's not coming there to make up the numbers. So Gregorio, if you want to look at George Russell and interpret him, ingest the driver that he's in that way, then that's up to you. I'm not going to tell you any different, but that's not how I see him in my subjectivity with my very limited nearly 40-year experience of F1. William Walter, is it lip service though? What's Walter said here? Cam, so true. I love Hamilton's driving, but the shenanigans outside and the lip service he does. Okay. Oh, Walter. Right, with 60 seconds left. What Walter's referring to is what some of my friends will talk about with Lewis, that they want to kind of seem like not be honest, but kind of be himself. But here's the problem with that, Walter, because, and this is the final point on this, guys. Oh, it's so techie. 55 of you currently. Right, look, if we get to 35 likes within the next 30 seconds, I will talk to this Lewis Hamilton point very quickly before I sign off. But this one's a bit techie and it might take longer than 60 seconds. So if you guys all smash the like very quickly, I will mention this point. If not, then I'm gonna come off because I don't want to talk to Lewis Hamilton and this stuff. Right, nobody's listening, nobody's watching, we're not going to get the likes. And so I am going to go and close the stream. You guys have been absolute legends. Thank you so much. Do me a favor on your way out, smash the like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. Why have I got so much saliva in my mouth? Too much talking. If we get to 35 likes in the next 30 seconds, I will talk to this final Lewis Hamilton one. If not, I'm going 30 likes, so we need another 5. Thank you so much for watching this. It means the world to me. 32 likes, we need 3 more. I don't want to talk about it, so I'm going to wrap the stream. If that thing flashes up to 35, I will talk to this last Lewis Hamilton point. I know it's techie, Cairo. It's too techie, man. Lewis Hamilton is the best driver. Oh, George, put the cap on. All right, look. You guys have been legends. We're at 33 likes, so you guys desperately want me to talk about this Lewis Hamilton thing, but I will leave it for another time. 32 likes, bang. Thank you so much to each and every single one of you for watching. Yeah. Oh, no, Foster. Right, you guys have got 30 seconds. Thank you. 34 likes. Thank you to each and every single one of you for 35 likes. Bastards. You guys have done it. Okay, cool. Right, 60 seconds on Lewis. Here is the Lewis Hamilton thesis, right? If you listen to what Lewis Hamilton's words, how he talks about F1, for the longest time, let's use his time at McLaren as a microcosm. For the longest time, he talked about not being able to be himself at McLaren. Look at him look at him now. And the way he wears his hair and his style and the fashion that he wears and the freedom with which he conducts himself versus when he first joined McLaren, right? Very cleanly shaved, no beard. Both him and Fernando, forget no beard, no facial hair at all. Both him and Fernando Alonso. He's talked very openly, has Lewis Hamilton, about feeling like he was imprisoned as far as not being able to show his true self at McLaren under Ron Dennis. That's the truth. Extrapolate that out to being an F1 driver. I think you could say exactly the same, right? Especially under bloody Max Mosley and Bernie Ecclestone. He was throttled, for want of a better word. He couldn't be himself. I think there is an element of that. I think it's dialed down. There's a brilliant book called Whistling Vivaldi that talks very extensively about this. And this is what Lewis Hamilton is talking about having to do in his McLaren days as the first black F1 driver. He was whistling Vivaldi. Google it. I won't even go into it here because I haven't got time. Google it and there's a whole diatribe and thesis and white paper about whistling Vivaldi and being an ethnic minority moving in westernized civilization. Lewis Hamilton, in summary, was whistling Vivaldi then and is whistling Vivaldi now to a lesser extent. And that's what some people don't like. I don't think that's fair, Foster, because that's a coping survival mechanism. That's something that Lewis Hamilton has to do still to a lesser extent than when he was at McLaren, but he's got to do it still. It's his protective cloak even as a person of colour moving through a world trying to navigate a space that's historically not been best fit or even welcomed a person of colour with open arms. Ergo, some people look at that and say, you know what, Lewis Hamilton he's not real. Well, he can't be real. He hasn't been able to be real. He's realer now. Like, yeah, you see him with the chains and like he'll make statements and arrest the cops that killed Breonna Taylor, but not 100% real. Google whistling Vivaldi and it will talk about that. That's all I'll say. I hope you enjoyed that. That's techie. That last piece anyway. 45 of you concurrently watching still. I hope you enjoyed it. Google whistling Vivaldi. You get some nous on that. It's a techie subject, but a difficulty, a friction that lots of people around the world have to contend with, not least Lewis Hamilton. Colin, I hope you appreciate that, man. It's techie, that last one. But you guys wanted me to talk to it. Thank you so much for watching the stream. I appreciate each and every single one of you ad infinitum. I'll be back at some point next week. I need to drop another video, but I don't know about the schedule. It's getting techie. I hope you guys are enjoying the edited videos on the Mothership channel. Then if it looks like it's been him and who's taken over there, or Foster Techie also. Thank you. You guys are absolute legends. Thank you for watching and enduring my F1 rabble and nonsense and shenanigans and tomfoolery. I'll be back at some point. Shakedown, try and get one out on Monday, depending on Shez and Baxty's schedule. Another edited video at some point next week. Have a fantastic Japanese race weekend. Thank you so much to each and every single one of you. Hug somebody that you love. And between now and next time, remember, look but never stare. Peace.